Okay, if you could just, last few, just take our seats, thanks, and we'll just start on the last presentation of the day, the tender briefing. So I'll speak for around 20 minutes, hopefully not more, and I just want to make sure I give everyone a really good opportunity to ask questions. A lot of the information that I'll be talking about here is actually in the tender documents, so I would imagine that many of you here have already downloaded the tender documents. But if you haven't, I'd urge you to get onto the Tenders Vic website and to register and to download those tender documents. So what I'll be covering is essentially what's being tendered, the key tender details, key dates, and the process of how to submit a tender. Important points for tenderers to note: eligibility criteria, how the evaluation process will work, and how successful tenderers will be selected. We'll look at the evaluation criteria both in summary and then in detail. I'll have something to say about what happens post-evaluation, and then there's a few further information items, and we'll open it to questions. So what's being tendered? So successful tenderers from this process will gain the exclusive right to apply to the the Earth Resources Regulator for an exploration licence over that relevant block for the proposed work program that has been put forward in the tender application. As all of you would no doubt note, that there's 4 blocks offered, ranging in size from 327 square kilometres to 512. In terms of the licensing process, once successful tenderers have been selected and licence applications are lodged, the normal Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act licensing process applies. You would note that the priority for this tender is on gold exploration. Coal and gas are excluded. However, we will accept tenders for other minerals, but these will only be considered if no eligible tender response for gold for a particular block is received, or if an eligible tender response is received, but it doesn't meet the minimum scoring thresholds for each of the 5 evaluation criteria for a particular block. And I'll explain the evaluation criteria and how the scoring works a little bit later. So if a tenderer is deemed successful, their tender response will essentially form their application to the Earth Resources Regulator for an exploration licence under the MRSDA. So tender details, as I said, register on the website. Tender reference number is there. You need to register on the website as a supplier. It's a Victorian Government procurement website. It's a bit of a nuance in the way that the website works, but that's what you need to do. You need to register as a supplier. Once you're registered, there are tender documents available on that website. The tender document package comes in 5 parts. There's Part A, which is the specification and requirements for tenderers. Part B is the conditions of participation in the tender. Part C, we outline a number of information sources that are available to help tenderers in preparing their tender responses, and data as well, geoscience data that was referred to by our GSV colleagues this morning. Part D is a block summaries document, so Craig Clifton alluded to that in his presentation, and essentially that's a summary, just a short summary, introductory summary if you like, of some key geoscience features, some land inventory features, minimum exploration expenditure requirements under the licence, and the relinquishment requirements over the 5 years of the licence term. And then Part E is the tenderer's response template. So key dates to note. So tender opened, I think that should be the 29th of October. Tender briefing is today. We are closing the period for tenderers asking questions shortly before the tender closes. So that period will close at 12 p.m. on the 24th of January. The tender itself closes at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time on Friday the 31st of January. And we will then undertake the eligibility assessments and the overall tender assessment. Now, exactly how long that process will take will depend on how many tender responses we receive and the time involved in evaluating those tenders. So, indicatively, we're suggesting that it might be April or May that you'd be notified, but that timeline may change depending on those factors, and both successful and unsuccessful tenderers will be notified in writing. So how to tender? As I said, you need to register on the website. It's the portal that we're using to manage the tender, so the tender documents are only available on the Tenders Vic website, and we will only be accepting tender responses in electronic format through that same website as well. Tender reference numbers there. Lodgement. So tenders must be received before the closing date and time in their entirety, and it is a tenderer's responsibility to ensure that sufficient time is allowed such that we in the department would receive those tenders by the closing time on that date. Updates. We're managing any updates to the process and questions and answers that might be asked through that Tenders Vic website. So any questions that tenderers submit to us, other than for simple administration things such as, I can't seem to register on the site, but other than for things that are material, we will be publishing all questions asked and all responses as well to ensure that the process is fair and that everyone has access to the same information. And those types of questions and answers will be added to the forum throughout the tender period, and once you're registered you'll get a notification if there is any questions and answers or any updates that have been lodged or responded to on that website. So just a few important things to note. Tenderers are welcome to apply for more than one block. A separate application for each block is required, so it's a separate Part E tenderer's response for each application is required. And tenderers must indicate if an application for one block is contingent on the outcome for another. So, for example, if you apply for 3 blocks, but you prefer, for example, block 1, but you apply for block 2 and 3 as well, then if you were successful for block 1 and would therefore no longer be interested in pursuing your application for block 2 and 3, you need to make that very clear in your tender application. As I said, the applications must be in the form of a completed Part E tenderer's response. Word limits do apply for each of the sections. Those word limits are outlined in that document. Attachments are permissible, but they must be referenced, they must be referenced in Part E. Evaluation of tender blocks is going to be conducted on a separate basis, so you don't get any particular advantage if you apply for 4 blocks or 3 or 2, but each block will be assessed on its own merits. And it's important to note that the evaluation will be will be performed on the basis of the information that you provide in your tender response. If required, the Secretariat for the tender process may seek clarifications on behalf of the evaluation panel if required. However, at this stage no provision has been made for tenderer presentations, so don't assume that you can provide a completed Part E and then you'll have an opportunity to come and present to us, because that's not part of the process at this stage. So you need to really make sure that your Part E applications are complete. I should also mention that the tender's being conducted within a very strict probity framework, so that's something that the Victorian Government takes very seriously. We have appointed an independent probity advisor who's here today, and Anne is overseeing all aspects of the tender process, including the evaluation, and will actually be present at the panel evaluation deliberations as an observer. And I should also remind people that that there is, apart from the tender documents themselves, there are a number of information items available on the Tenders Vic website to assist tenderers: geoscience data, as Cameron mentioned this morning, land inventory and data sets, as Craig Clifton mentioned, and we've got some fact sheets as well that may assist in preparing your responses. So eligibility criteria. So the first stage of the evaluation will be an assessment of eligibility criteria. So basically are you a minerals exploration company? Do you have the right to conduct minerals exploration work here within Australia? Are you proposing to explore for gold or for other eligible minerals? And then the last one is, are you proposing a work program that at least meets the minimum expenditure requirements or exceeds the minimum expenditure requirements for the block that you're proposing to bid for each year of the licence. So this is a direct extract from the tender documents. So those are the eligibility criteria. So all eligible tenders post that assessment will then progress to evaluation. This might be a little bit hard to see, but it's a schematic about how the evaluation process will work. So we have 5 evaluation criteria. 4 of them are technical and 1 is a responsible exploration, which has 4 parts. The technical assessment will be done by an independent panel of technical experts that's being drawn together to undertake the evaluation. That panel will undertake the assessment and scoring for each block for all of those technical criteria. It is a requirement, as outlined in the tender documents, that tenderers must score. Tenders are being scored on a 0 to 10-point scale against each criteria, and that a tender must score at least 6 or above for each criteria to be eligible to be a successful tenderer. So tenders that meet that requirement for the technical criteria will progress to being considered for the responsible exploration criteria. As I mentioned, that has 4 parts. 1 part is the traditional owner component. As Jane Burton mentioned, we have convened a traditional owner assessment panel to undertake that assessment on that criteria only. And we're also convening a responsible exploration panel to undertake the responsible exploration assessment for the other 3 criteria. So the scoring, if you like, of tenders from the traditional owner assessment will carry over into the responsible exploration assessment process and be added to the other 3 sub-criteria. Those results will then be taken forward and collated, and the overall scores for each tender response will then be determined based on the overall score times the weighting for each criteria and ranked accordingly for each block. Look, it's probably worth mentioning that it is possible that there may be, for a particular block, that there may be more than 1 tenderer on the same score that is ranked first. So if that happens, then the successful tenderer will be determined on the basis of whoever has obtained the higher score for the responsible exploration criteria. And if that score is the same, then it will be on the tender who proposes the larger work program in overall exploration spend over that 5 years. So the evaluation criteria, I'm sure most people will be familiar with this, but in case anyone isn't, there's 5 of them. They're separated into assessing company strategy and capability, if you like, and then the work program. So we've got the weightings there. So the fit of your proposal with your overall company minerals exploration strategy is weighted at 5. Minerals exploration capability, which relates to your organisation and also the people who will be undertaking the work, and financial viability, has a ranking of 20. And then under work program, the exploration model that you're proposing has a ranking of 5, your exploration program, 25, and then the responsible minerals exploration component is 45 overall, broken down into 20 for the working with traditional owners component, 15 for working with landholders and local communities, 5 for sustainability, and 5 for local content. So, how do you intend to incorporate using local content in your exploration program? Now, this detail, it's probably going to be a little bit hard to read, but this is an extract directly out of the tender documents. So when we talk about minerals exploration strategy, we're looking to see, asking for you to demonstrate how your proposal forms a coherent part of your overall company strategy. For the second component, the capability and financial viability, so we want to understand the experience and qualifications of the team that you're proposing to undertake the work, including any contractors that you might be proposing to use. So how will they actually manage and deliver your proposed program? We are asking for examples of 3 recent projects or programs, including the key senior personnel that have run those programs, preferably demonstrating a whole range of experience, which includes advancing early stage projects, applying contemporary methods and approaches, exploring for the eligible minerals being targeted, undercover, and then the third element is demonstrating how you intend to fund your program, and including whether funds would need to be raised, and if so, how do you propose to do that, and what are the timelines involved. So we'd like to know of any past successes that you and the principals have had in raising funds for programs in the past. If you have any arrangements with funding partners or strategic partners that would be contributing funds, we'd like to know about that. And we need to see verifiable financial statements and reports, and any partners, and for any partners that you're proposing also that would fund the program. So we're asking for the last 3 years being provided as attachments. And also we're asking for the company's annual minerals exploration budget and expenditure in the past 5 years, including any commentary as required. So criteria 3 is the exploration model. So we're asking for an outline of the targeting criteria that you would use, and a discussion and review of currently available geoscience data which has informed the model and relevant commodities targeted. So there's plenty of data, as we've already mentioned, that's available. So for the exploration program, we want to see a phased program over the licence term, and detail around the indicative activity, expenditure and timing, including a number of elements. So we understand that projects like this tend to be more certainty in the immediate term rather than longer term, but as much detail as you can provide would be suggested, with any caveats as you see fit. So that includes geophysics, geochem, geology, research and innovation, and then we'd like to know about your target testing program. So any proposed types of drilling that you're intending to execute in that first 5 years, any proposed techniques that you'll apply with those processes, sampling of drilling, any proposed programs highlighting geological, geochem, geophysical and geometallurgical measurements and properties to be collected, data integration and analysis. So how you're proposing to do that, how that information will be stored and integrated and interpreted to determine validity and evaluate and prioritise results from targets tested. And research and innovation. So if there's any emerging technologies or techniques that you're proposing to use as part of the target evaluation, we'd request that you include that in your application. Criteria number 4, the minerals, sorry, on criteria 4. Third element, the resource evaluation program. So, sorry. Yep. So the same sorts of things again for your resource evaluation program. And that rounds out the exploration program. And then criteria 5, responsible minerals exploration. So what we want to see here is we want to understand how you will, or how you are intending to carry out exploration in a responsible way that demonstrates strong social values. There's 4 elements to this. The first one I mentioned is working with traditional owners. So this is the element that will be assessed by the traditional owner panel. We're really interested in your attributes and capacities for effective engagement with Indigenous peoples as part of your program. We've outlined a number of specific components there that we're seeking information on. So do you have any policies in place in relation to engaging with Indigenous peoples? Where does responsibility for that sit within your organisation? How do you actually ensure that all of your personnel are aware of those policies and are committed to implementing those policies in the work that they will undertake? What's your experience in negotiating and implementing agreements with Indigenous peoples? And it might be here, or it might be overseas experience. And any details of any systems that your company has in place to review and improve its performance in relation to Indigenous engagement. And do you have a feedback mechanism to deal with situations where Indigenous people believe engagement has not been satisfactory? So we'd like to know about that also. So the next three criteria will be assessed by the Responsible Exploration panel. So the first of those three is working with landholders and communities, and that's really around your approach and plan for engaging with landholders in the area, local communities and other stakeholders throughout your proposed minerals exploration program. So it's not just landholders that you may be targeting to get access to ground, but the context is broader than that. Sustainability. So what's your approach for sustainability and risk management as part of your exploration activities? We've listed a number of components there that we require information against. So risk assessment, registers, tools and procedures. How do you manage risk? Do you have an environmental policy? If yes, can you describe it? And how your activities will be performed and informed by that policy. Do you have an environmental management system? Any environmental or occupational health and safety breaches of legislation, if you have any of those within the last 5 years, we're asking for that information to be provided. How will relevant risk and safety controls be communicated to employees and contractors to ensure that they're aware and monitored and reported on as appropriate? And outlining any sustainability measures that you will seek to employ in work programs, which might include safety rehabilitation, baseline monitoring, those sorts of things. And then the last of those sub-criteria is local content. So that's really, as I mentioned, around demonstrating that your program will source, where possible, local goods and services to benefit local communities, particularly in employment and upskilling, local industry participation and development, including research programs, initiatives, Indigenous and regional development. So once the evaluation has been conducted, as I mentioned, successful and unsuccessful tenderers will be notified in writing at the conclusion of the process. Again, timeline dependent on a number of tender responses. Successful tenderers will then be invited to apply for a minerals exploration licence to the Earth Resources Regulator within the department, covering the block for which the tender was successful for the proposed work program that you've submitted through the tender process. So there's further information available on the department's website, general information, if you like. So I'd encourage you to look at that. I've mentioned registering on the Tenders Vic website as well, so it's important that you do that. If you have any specific questions on the tender process, you're welcome to submit those in writing to mdv at vic.gov.au. As I mentioned, questions and answers will be provided, but published on the Tenders Vic website to ensure access for fair access for everyone. If you're not sure, then you're welcome to email us and have a conversation with us whether your question sort of qualifies. It might be a simple administrative question. But if you're not sure, then we'll advise you whether it's the type of question that it's appropriate for us to publish. And you'll then be given an opportunity to withdraw that question if you so choose. So the best way to be kept informed of all the questions and answers is through the forum. And as I mentioned, when questions and answers are posted, you'll get an email notification. So that concludes the presentation itself. So I'd just like to open the floor for any questions that people might have.
Thank you. When the questions are published on the website, will it say who's asking the questions?
No. Questions will be de-identified.
Yeah, thank you.
Just in relation to the questions again, what sort of time frame would you like to get back for those answers to those questions?
Look, it's usually pretty quick. Many, it would be, within the day. But we understand that speedy clarification of those questions is very important for tenderers. We understand and appreciate that you're all putting an enormous amount of time and effort and money into this. So it's an absolute priority for us to answer those questions quickly.
Given the way some of your points have been framed in terms of a company or the applicant needing to be able to demonstrate certain capabilities or certain experience, it strikes me that on reading it, one gets the impression that the whole process could be seen to be tilted in favour of large companies that are deep-pocketed. How can a junior or a private company, which as a corporate entity has zero experience, but is associated with individuals who have deep sector experience, be adequately comforted in relation to this process?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. But we ask specifically for the demonstrated experience and capability of the company and the key individuals who will be undertaking the work. So that's a critically important element. And if it was to be, say, a small company of a number of individuals that have fantastic ex-industry experience but have come together for this particular proposal, if you like, that wealth of experience from previous corporate lives counts towards the overall assessment. That's a critical part of it.
You mentioned that you want to know in the tender documents whether there is a partner involved and what the partner's credentials are. Now, that obviously applies for right now being planned at this stage. Is there any restrictions if a company was to be the successful tenderer? Is there any restrictions afterwards to form a joint venture or bring a partner in, or is it as applied for, that's how the project will run?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's one that we'll take on notice. So we'll publish that question and a response to that question on the website. Any more questions?
Yep, Fiona. What's the planned process for any commitments that are made in a successful submission for how that will get carried across to an EL application or a licence?
Yeah, okay. So what we've done is we've structured the tender process and the tender documents to require the information that would be required for an EL licence application, so that we're not sort of coming back to you twice. So essentially the submission or the tender response that you put in becomes the information in that becomes the licence application. So I'm not from the regulator, so I'm sure that there's probably a form that you have to fill in, but essentially that submission is the basis for your application. Any more questions? Yep.
Sorry, I've got another one. Is it possible for any of the information that was provided at the community briefings to be put on the tender website, so language that's being provided to the communities is able to be replicated and consistent in applications? Because I've spoken to some farmers that have been there and I'm just keen to make sure that the information they've been provided, that all tenderers are aware of the same.
Yeah, understand. Yeah, look, I think that's something we can definitely look into. Again, I'll take that one on notice and we will we'll get back to you with an answer on that one very quickly through the tenders website. So if you haven't registered, please register. Any more questions? No? Okay, fantastic. Well, I hope that everyone's found this day today really informative. It was our intention to assist you to understand the context for this tender and to provide information about useful information resources that are out there and the government's expectations for the tender process. So I hope we've achieved that. Thank you so much for devoting a whole day of your valuable time to coming to join us today to hear about this opportunity. We look forward to receiving your tender responses. We look forward to receiving your questions and answers. And I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.